Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leathercraft, and we're going to have a blast making a pair of pirate arm guards. This is a great project for so many reasons. I'm going to do my best not to roll here. Well, right off the bat, nice touch to a pirate costume, very unique. But secondly, we're simply dropping in an old world nautical map on leather. How about decoration for our home? Create a beautiful map with pre-existing land masses, or how about our own? And we're going to talk about that. But create that map and frame it. Is that not a beautiful decoration for our home? Or how about we know someone with a boat? That would be the most unique gift you could give them. All right, one last point and we're going to move on. If you're new to stamping or tooling or the swivel knife, this is a perfect project because we don't have to be perfect. In fact, less perfect is better. So great way to come up to speed with your tools. All right, I'm going to stop right there. Anything I use in this video, weaverleathercraft.com, or check below. We've got links there, going to take you straight to our website. So let's step over here and start, in my opinion, one of the most fun projects we will ever work on. We're going to start with just a basic arm guard design. So let's jump over to a digital pick. Now for me, these are my dimensions, so work this to your arm. But around my wrist, I'm at 7 inches. My upper forearm is 10 inches. And then from just below my elbow to a hair above my wrist is 8 inches. For our lace holes, we're going to come in 1/2 of an inch from our edge, 1 inch from our top, 1 inch from our bottom, and then we're going to give that a 2-inch spread. So easy enough on the pattern. Let's transfer that over to some of our pattern sheeting. Well, now I've got a great, just a simple great pattern. I can use this for any design. Once we get this done, let's transfer this over to either some copy paper or some tracing film. So now we can start designing our landmass. Now, cool point here. We could go, say on our right arm, Old World, left arm, New World. Or maybe split Australia, East Coast, West Coast, left and right arm. All kinds of cool ways we can go here. What I've done is create my own abstract landmass because when we bend this around on our arm, like it would be on our arm, I want to be able to see some mountains, some shoreline, and definitely our compass rose. So I've just created my own land. That's a blast creating this, okay? So now that we've got this done, say we're on our paper, let's transfer that over to our tracing film. Now at this point, we're simply going to drop in longitude, latitude, our shorelines. Let's get an idea of where our rivers are going to start, and you'll see where I'm going with this. We're going to drop in our stamps through here. Right here for our compass rose, we're going to drop in 2 circles. We'll fill this in, but let's jump over to that right now because this is fun. On our compass rose, we can go 1,000 different directions. In fact, looking at the old nautical maps, these can be complex to extravagant. We're going to go a little bit easier. So therefore, we just need 3 stamps. We've got a center stamp, a rose. We've got our continuous mule's foot, and then a floral stamp. That's going to look pretty good. Now, for our decoration, there are so many ways we can go. Right here, I've simply used a 1/8 inch flat chisel for an overland route. That's pretty cool. Right here, we can go with grasslands, foothills. There's our chisel for an overland route. We can drop in some waves in our ocean. Right here, we can use a textured bevel for our shoreline. We can use a backgrounder to create lakes, deltas, or we can even go with a 3-sided mountain. And there's one more cool thing. Like I said, we can make our compass rose as extravagant as we want. We can do the same thing with our landmass. Right here, how about just directional lines? Again, we can make this as extravagant as we want and have a good time doing it. All right, so if I can find our pattern in here, there we go. Let's do this. Let's jump over to our main table. We're going to cut some leather. We're going to go with a 4 to 5 ounce natural veg tan. We can always bump this up in weight, your call. But we're going to use our Weaver Select, and I love this leather, particularly if we're going to use our swivel and stamps. Now, this is our 4 to 5 ounce single shoulder. We can absolutely go this route. Very affordable piece of leather, and I use this in most of our videos. But since we've got the Weaver Select in-house, let's use it. So I'm going to drop in my pattern. Let's trace this out and mark for our lace holes. Now I've avoided range marks. In fact, it's hard to find a range mark on a piece of Weaver Select, so I can't really say if that's a range mark or that may be a little bit of dye. The point is, the rougher these are, the more range marks, the more blemishes, the more authentic they're going to look. All right, so let's cut this out and then we'll punch for our lace holes. And our round corners. Okay, let's jump over here. We're gonna go with the second hole from the top, the second tube down from the top. It's gonna be a good size for an 1/8 inch piece of lace. Let's punch our holes. That looks good. Okay, let's step back over to our pattern table. We're gonna trace in our basic lines. Our first step here is to case our leather. We're simply going to add water to our veg tan. These are our dressing sponges and I love these. I tend to cut them down. Makes these go a lot further. So let's add some good water to this. Nice. Notice how we've got a consistent chestnut color. Okay, let's give this about 10 minutes. Let that water wick in. Looks good, feels good, got some good moisture there. So let's drop in our tracing film and let's just trace all of our existing lines. Okay, we've got our landmass marked. We're going to do our rows last. And in fact, we could actually just do this. If we want to go very complicated, we can just do this on a separate piece of tracing film. But I've got my landmass in. I've got my rivers marked, at least the beginning. So now let's drop in our longitude and latitude. We've got our basic lines in. I can see every bit of that. Maybe a little tough for the camera to see over here where it's still a little wet. We might need to wet this again, but let's go ahead and do this. For our compass rose, it's hard to draw a circle. Let's start here. I'm going to go with a 1 1/4 inch inside circle. Let's see if I can find that right there. Because if we start on our inside, it's going to be a little easier to make sure our outside is consistent. Okay, 1 1/4 on the inside. Now let's jump out to 1 3/4 on the outside. That's going to give us enough room to drop in our floral stamp. Okay, that looks good. Last thing, north. Let's drop that in. And there we go. That looks good. That's just what we need. So now I'm going to do the other. Then let's step over to our stamp table. So that one's ready to go. What we can do, somebody wasn't paying attention. Now I work by myself, so I'm not pointing fingers here, but I did 2 rights. What I'd actually like to do is a left and a right. So all I need to do there is flip my tracing film. So now I've got left and right, but one thing we need to watch out for, our end. If we trace this here, it's going to be backwards. So let's bring that over here. Now let's trace in our end. All right, that looks good. So let's step over to our stamp table, drop in our mountains, our rivers, and some forest. To save us a little time, I've cased our arm guards again. So let's lay those face to face, set those aside, and give those time to let that water wick in again. Now we're going to take a test piece because there are all kinds of ways we can go here. Now we've created our own world. Where do we want our mountains or our lakes? That's exactly right. But also at the same time, if we're copying a map, that can be a blast too in trying to figure out which tools are going to work, where they're going to work, and how we can get all those details in. In fact, right here, here's my test strip. Yeah, right there. Yeah, look at that compass rose. That looks pretty good. Mountains, trees, let's see what works with us. Now, in my tools, I've probably got over 200, but let's keep it simple. Let's keep it down to just a couple of tools. Let's start right here. So we need mountains. This is a mule's foot. There we go. In fact, it looks like a hoof. Let's stack a few of these and see if this is going to work for our mountains. Well, that looks like a good mountain chain right there. Okay, so we've got our mountains. Now, how about our trees? There's 2 or 3 ways we can go here. Right here, we have a foliage and texture tool. Let's see if this works. Well, I kind of like that. That looks like a forest. Other ways we can go. This is a continuous mule foot. There we go. Well, that's a little heavy. That might not be our best choice, but let's drop a few in. Okay, not bad, but I do like that. That looks good. One other way we can go is just a simple backgrounder. Well, that's kind of cool. It gives us kind of an evergreen look. But I tell you what, I think I like that triangular best. Now, the two other tools we're going to use right here for the center of our compass rose, it's just a good round design. How easy is that? And this, again, our floral, we're going to use this as well for our compass rose. Now, again, there's 1,000 ways we can go here. In fact, right here is a star. We certainly could drop that in somewhere. And right here, a camouflage tool with a nice starburst. That might do something cool. All right, so we've got a feel for this. Let's do this. Let's jump over, because here, let's start with our swivel knife. And notice right here, I've got these additional lines. All kinds of ways we can go with our water line, but that to me seems to look best. So let's start with our swivel knife. Perfect place to learn a swivel knife, because this does not have to be perfect. For me, I tend to push my knife. Old school, the way to go is to draw our knife. But in all honesty, as many of the big pros that I've talked to, the one point they agree on is that the outcome. That's what's important. So go with what's comfortable. But with these, I'm going to make 2 passes on each line. Get a little depth there. So let's do our outside line on our mainland, and let's do our island. Okay, our landmass is done. Looks pretty good. We've got a good deep line there. That antique's going to sink in. Now let's do our end. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now over to our water lines. We can mark these from our pattern, but in all honesty, let's just go abstract, because we're going to do a single line, then we're going to drop in 2 lines above that and a smaller there, and we're just going to break those up across our shoreline. Okay, well that looks pretty good. Love these lines on our shoreline. That looks very cool. Now let's go with our longitude and latitude. Now we could certainly freehand this, but there's no reason. Let's drop in our straight edge and simply use that as our guide. There we go. Plenty of line. So let's do that again, down and across. Those are in. Now, the more details we add, the better it looks. But notice already that looks pretty good. So now let's jump down to our compass rose. We can use our template and use our swivel with our template, but that can be a little bit tough. So what we're going to do is just do a quadrant at a time. Okay, let's see how that looks. You know what? Perfect circle it isn't, but it looks pretty good. And no one will ever notice that that's not exact. All right, let's do the inside. Well, that looks pretty good. Again, imperfect. Well, actually, that's part of the point. So what we're going to do now, let's jump over to our stamps. Let's drop in our mountains, our forests, and then we'll use our swivel for our rivers. Let's start with our mule's foot. We're going to create our mountains. Now we're just going to do a spine, but again, it's our world. We can do whatever we want. So I'm going to work across the middle, but I'm going to branch out a little bit where we may have our land pushing further into the sea. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Nice mountain range. We even got a small pass right there. Okay, let's jump over and drop in our rivers. Then we'll drop in our trees. But what we need to do here is fork our rivers. Now, I'm not going to change camera positions again, so I'm going to push with my swivel. But let's come out, and again, these don't need to be perfect. Let's work these up into our mountains and our rivers. We're going to let these fork and fade out as we get up into our mountains. Again, the details. It looked good to start with, but each additional detail we drop in just makes it look better and better. Now, I've forgotten about our island. Let's drop in some mountains across the spine of our island. Okay, that looks very cool. Maybe not enough room for a river on our island. You know what, but that's okay. Now let's drop in our trees. Obviously, our trees probably going to be around our rivers, so let's work our trees first off in the crooks in our rivers. That looks good. Now what do you say? Let's add a little more tree outside of our mountains. Trees look good. Very cool. Now we're going to do these separately. So, in all honesty, no two are alike, absolutely unique. Okay, let's do this. Let's jump over to our compass rose. What we're going to do, let's find our continuous mule foot. There we go. Now I'm going to drop this in a little bit further than the other three. So let's bring that in on that line. Just make sure that's straight up and down. There we go. Okay, same thing on the other three directions. Let's take our swivel knife and let's cut a little bit deeper on our cross lines here. Let's drop in diagonal. Now it'd be hard to calculate where that is, but let's just use our cross hatches. Looking good thus far. Let's jump over to our floral tool. Now we've got just enough room in between each of these sections for one stamp. There we go. Let's continue around. That looks good. Let's drop this in our center to cover our crosshatch there. Well, that looks fantastic. Very cool. I love this map. We're done here. So what I'm going to do is the same thing to my other piece here, my left arm. Then we're going to let these dry overnight. Well, that looks pretty good. We could go so much further with the detail, but I'm really happy with the way these are turning out. All right, let's keep these overnight, because from here, all we have to do is our edge work, dye antique top coat, and this beautiful pair of arm guards is done. Ample dry time, so let's jump over to 3 steps we're familiar with: bevel, groove, and slick. Now, on our edges, you do not have to go this route, but to me, it just makes our projects look very finished, very professional. So let's start right here. I typically set my groover 1/8 of an inch, so let's groove all the way around. And there we go, that looks good. Let's jump over to a number 1 bevel. Since we're going with a 4 to 5, let's bevel all the way around our front, and let's bevel on our back side as well. Now over here, it's not going to bevel as easy, but we'll get it. That looks good. Now let's take a sponge. What I want to do is wet my edge. Get that out of there. There we go. Let's wet our edge. And I want to wet this in a way so that we don't run the risk of water lines on our top grain in case we use a light color dye or no dye at all. And let's just wet our edge lightly all the way around. Good. Let's take our slicker. Right about this middle groove looks just right for a 4 to 5. So let's lay this on our edge so we've got some body here, and let's slick all the way around. Now, pressure, not the point. More heat and friction. We just want a nice, even, rounded edge. Okay, I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but now that's smooth, rounded, and a little bit slick. Feels good to the touch. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to our second arm guard. That looks good. One extra point when we're slicking, if our corners aren't perfect, that's going to help a little bit. So what I'm going to do, let's give our edges about half an hour to dry. In that time, I'm going to clean up, set us up to dye. And if you're new to leathercraft, I bet you're wondering if leathercraft takes that level of commitment. No, we're simply going to add some dye. Couple of points. First off, we're going to go with a saddle tan dye. It's relatively light, but here's what's happening. We're adding an antique. That's going to darken. Then we're going to add our leather balm. That's going to darken. But all told, our lines do stand out, and it's a pretty color. An alternative here. This is our test strip. So all this is a dark brown antique on our natural veg, no dye. Well, it certainly makes the lines stand out, but I'm just not really happy with that color. So we're going to go with this beautiful brown, very rich color. Now, when we're applying dye, we can go with a dauber, but what's going to happen is we're going to have bad streaking, because our point here is to get as much coverage without it dripping wet as we can on our first pass. Then we can come back with a second and third pass immediately. Let's don't let it dry, but that'll give us some consistency. Sponge, great way to go, our high density sponges, because with this I can quickly get our first coat on. That's a good way to go. I tend to like to dip dye. All we're going to do is run our arm guard through our dye rather quickly, then we're going to set it aside and let it dry. Let's let some of that dye drain off. Let's lay this out, and quickly, let's remove the excess dye with a rag. Now, all we have to do, set that aside and walk away. And there we go. Quick, clean, consistent, no fuss, no mess, and these are going to look good. All right, I need to give these probably 4 or 5 hours to dry, so let's set these aside. We are close. Plenty of dry time, everything looks consistent, good. Now we're going to add antique. So what I want to do is I want to cover the back with simple painter's tape so that we don't get our antique wrapping around. To me, that just looks terrible. Now we can lay this on, then once it's on, we can just trim this right to our edge. That looks good. Let's move our paper and our plastic bag out of the way, and let's just trim this flush. Cut, looks good. Let's press our edge down all the way around on both. And I am going to reset here. Let's add some antique to these. We're going to go with a light brown antique to keep us from going too dark here. Now, cool point. This is a neutral antique, so therefore we can mix this with any one of our Angelus paint colors. That could be a nice touch, but we're going to go with a light brown. Now, with this we've got a lighter color dye. I don't want streaking on this, so what I'm going to do is with a rag, much like our dye, I'm going to get as much coverage as I can on my first pass. Then we'll come back in with our dauber. Antique can absolutely be a mess. In fact, it's the last stop for a rag in my shop. Okay, so we've got some antique on. Now let's go to our dauber. Let's see if we can get some antique down into our groove line, all of our longitude, latitude, our trees. Let's see if we can get as much antique down into those cuts as we can. Well, that looks good. All of those lines are standing up nicely. I'm going to set this aside to dry, do the other one, give that a few minutes to dry. Let's add our antique or our top coat. We're done. Our antique has had time to dry. That looks good. In fact, with the gloss on it after buffing it, that looks good already. But our leather balm is going to darken a little bit, but it's going to enrich in our dye color. It's going to protect us from the leather and the leather from us. Now, with this, I typically have two rags, a wet rag and a dry rag. So what I'm going to do, much like my antique, let's get a full pass first. Then we'll come back and add a little bit more. Taking off some antique and some dye, that's okay. Let's come back in, let that dry just a little bit. Now let's start to buff this. That looks good. So let's do this. Let's take our tape off, then we're going to hit our edges. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Maybe just a hair here and there, but overall, that looks good. So let's take our rag with some leather balm. Let's hit our edges again, just lightly. With this, let's just buff off whatever we have on our top grain. Now we could go back to our slicker, but all told, I've got a nice slicked edge. So let's jump over to our dry rag, lay this on the edge of our table, and basically we're going to burnish with our rag, but we're also wiping off the extra leather balm. Good. I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but that is smooth. It's slick, got a little bit of gloss to it. Yay! Okay, I'm going to jump over, leather balm, remove my tape, do my edges on the other arm. And to our last step, let's drop some lace onto these. You can lace these any way you would like. Your project, your call. But the one thing we want to do is work from our wrist up. We don't want the ends of our lace hanging in our hands. That can be very irritating. So on this, we're going to go with our Let-A-Go lace and about 38, maybe 40 inches. It seems very long. But what we're going to do is tie a knot in each end. So when we want to put the arm guards on, we open them up, we slide them on, and with a little wear on both the lace and the holes, we'll be able to pull this and the arm guard will cinch on our arm. Very easy to put on. So let's start right here. I'm going to come from the outside in and the same on the other side. Let's equal those out. Good. From this side, I'm going to come out outside, from the inside out. There we go, if I could say that correctly. Now on our third hole, outside in, and on our fourth, inside out. So therefore, our lace is on the outside where we're going to tie this. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Well, that certainly looks great. Very cool. Let's tie a knot at the end of each piece of lace. Okay. Ready to go. So again, when this wears in, we'll be able to just pull these two pieces and it will cinch on our arm. We're doing this one-handed. But for me, I tend to just tuck the end of the lace back down inside. That keeps it somewhat tight, but comfortable as well. Okay, we'll do the same thing to the other pair. And our last knot. Look at that project. What a blast. How much fun is that? And how good does that look? Well, how'd we do? Let's take a little bit closer look. Beautiful, rich brown. The antique sinking down into those cuts. That is going to be a perfect addition to just about any pirate costume. Now, one point, a little bit glossy, brand new, that's exactly right. Here's how we deal with that. We wear them, we use them, we love them. They get a little bit beat up, that's good because now they look absolutely authentic and that's what we're looking for. If you go with a map, might be a little bit dark. Maybe do a stain or no dye at all, and that's going to be gorgeous. But either way you go, I hope your arm guards or your map is spot on beautiful. Good luck with your projects.